The Witcher. You probably know it as this, and this. A beautiful crafted world in both its aesthetics, world, storytelling, and even gameplay. But it wasn't always like this. The Witcher 3 was an amazing popular game, selling tens of millions of copies. However, there was a time this game was much smaller, far more junky and unpolished, from combat, performance, animations, voice acting, although heavily praised for its story, game-changing choices, highly immersive world, great characters, soundtrack, and good use of its source material. A diamond in the rough, as some might call it. A game that was missed by many by its unimpressive visuals and presentation. The Witcher initially started production as far back as 2002, a fairly ambitious game for the new upcoming developers, CD Projekt. At this time, a small team composed of only 15 developers, their previous work had been mostly ports, primarily translations of famous games like Baldur's Gate by BioWare from English to Polish, but attempts at PC ports of the console-only game Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance were made, although met with failure due to financial reasons. It was around this time the small company decided to take its first steps into producing their own game, using the code from their previous failed port as a stepping stone. The rights to a very popular book franchise in Poland was then purchased, the Witcher franchise. Its first iteration was akin to Baldur's Gate and Diablo, a top-down perspective RPG. This prototype or demo was pitched to multiple publishers but to no avail. In retrospective, CD Projekt's own director has described the game as, and quote, a piece of crap. The project was then mostly abandoned, but some developers stuck to the idea of developing their own game. These same developers took years to even establish what they wanted their game to be. Thankfully, ties to companies like BioWare, some aid was offered, like the licensing of their engine, the Aurora engine. Used in games like Neverwinter Nights, a newer version of that same engine was also used on the more popular Dragon Age Origins. Atari also took on the project of publishing it. The small studio grew from 15 developers to a whopping 100 plus developers throughout its production. Risky investments were made, content cut, and many other struggles, but the passion to create their own game carried through and eventually led to the creation of the RPG The Witcher in 2007. We play Geralt, the White Wolf, a mutant having supernatural powers, one of the few monster slayers in this fantasy world. It is our job to protect the people for a fee. A Witcher, which seemingly is suffering from a mysterious amnesia. It is now your job to find out what happened. The game was met with positive reviews and generally okay sales. Having barely no name to itself, it built a small but tight-knit group of fans. Its general presentation and visuals felt relatively dated, even at its time of release, to a fault due to its unimpressive engine. Even then, working with what they had, it was pushed to the limit, all the while having its own charm and unique identity, clearly implemented in this world from the original books, adding a unique atmosphere to cities, villages, overall environments, and even the armor design. Geralt, on the other hand, for someone now used to the bearded, rugged Geralt from Witcher 3, can find this version to be a little bit scuffed, almost resembling Nevermind. The Witcher world was immediately captivating, from its political intrigue to the monsters that lurked at sundown, hidden out of sight of its populace, with that ever-constant folk-like music in the background, further immersing you in this dark, gloomy world. A world populated by multi-layered characters with vast and different personalities that you actually cared for and had feelings towards too, even though their faces either looked like a Muppet or the stuff of nightmares. Nevertheless, our role as a Witcher was quite a badass one to immediately get thrown into. At this time, I was a huge fan of a show called Supernatural that follows these hunters that take on jobs to take care of monsters, such as vampires, ghouls, ghosts, and even demons. So for me, being able to play exactly that in a medieval setting was almost a dream come true. Choice is a strong word in The Witcher. Your choices matter and can change the world. As a Witcher, a monster slayer, your job is simple. kill monsters. More often than not, Geralt is dragged into politics and choosing sides, but as a Witcher, you can choose to become neutral or choose a side. Either of them will have a big repercussion, which often might feel like a bad one, but in reality there's never really a good, perfect choice. They're either bad or less bad choices, and there's never really a good side that you can particularly choose, as nothing is black and white. That can be seen as awfully depressing, but this is the world that we get to play through. It can be dark and gritty, but occasionally some light can be seen, even on the so-called monsters. After all, that term is rather relative of whom it can be applied in the Witcher world. In the end, it is again your choice to make up those decisions, be a simple side quest to the main story plot, or even the fate of characters, or getting on with everything in sight. Classic Geralt. Combat and all of that side of the gameplay is where some of the game can fall apart for some. The world, characters and stories is all perfectly established and polished, but the combat seems it was rather made by someone that wasn't sure on what they wanted to do. Here we have neither an action combat style or the more traditional targeting style with multiple abilities, spells and buttons found in other RPGs of its time. Instead, we have a mix. We can click on targets and even items with our mouse, or even fully play on one akin to Diablo, but our character actually auto-attacks, much like those RPGs, but with prompts to chain attacks to keep on auto-attacking, instead of having abilities to click aside from our signs, which is basically magic. To properly chain them, there's an internal timer. When your cursor flashes up, it's time to click to keep on attacking. If you don't, you will miss an attack and start all over again, almost like a quick time event, however permanent. Skill or talent points will come in to improve your fighting as well. Much like any other RPG, it has an extensive skill tree where you can invest talent points as you meditate, be into melee, both on its silver and steel weaponry, and a variety of stats such as dexterity, strength, stamina, and sign magic. Then we have stances or fighting styles to change how we do those set attacks. Each stance will favor different enemy types and damage in different ways. Fast and strong style, which you might recognize, and the group style, functioning as an AoE. Knowing when to switch and what enemy is weaker to one is part of the learning curve. It took some time getting used to. Having this permanent quick time event for every fight can prove a nuisance, restricting when you should attack, giving you this illusion of an action combat style, yet at its core is much like a traditional old RPG combat, although with some twists and some extra clunkiness. All in all, considering its roots, it does make sense. As for the defensive side, such as dodging, parrying, are also based on stats. Once again, like traditional RPGs, even though you can actively dodge with your character, such as roll and jump in combat, it is also tied to your stat percentage. Overall, a rather unique combat system was created for the Witcher game, where an attempt is made to create their own take on a genre, or was simply impossible to achieve a fully action combat style initially intended by the developers with this particular engine. It won't be for everyone, but once you get into its mindset, there is some depth here, especially on the later half of the game. Being a Witcher, however, there's a different mindset you have towards fighting, being prepared. The use of alchemy here is extensive, often seen by myself as a boring type of profession or skill in RPGs. Here was done so it improves your combat in various meaningful ways, be it to improve damage, defensives, resources, or just providing things such as night vision, be with potions, oils, or even bombs. This is often done before going into battle and against specific type of monsters that you first must study and learn with a variety of materials and books found within the game or through sheer experimentation. Sadly, when it came to equipment like weapons and armor, leave much to be desired, having a total of 3 or so different armor sets in the entire game, although more weapon slots than any other Witcher sequel. An enhanced edition, however, came 1 year later to fix many of the game issues, like the dreadful loading screens, the messy inventory system, vast number of bug fixes, and a lot more content added. Expect to spend at least 10 to 20 hours on the main campaign, or upwards to 50 hours overall. This is also the only version you can find of the game, so you won't come across many problems like bugs. The Witcher 1 wasn't an amazing success, but it did many things right. It didn't sold millions of copies, but it did give enough confidence to the developers to immediately start production of The Witcher 2 on their own self-created engine, the Red Engine. This was met by once again many hurdles during its production. Console versions of The Witcher 1 to PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360 were outsourced. That soon backfired, leading to many unfortunate production costs. Amidst a global crisis in 2007 and 8, no less, CD Projekt Red almost filed bankruptcy. Smartly, they decided to focus on Witcher 2 solely for the PC and Xbox 360 and put any other project on hold, a decision that proved fruitful, as The Witcher 2 fixed many of the issues Witcher 1 had. Not only that, the Red Engine made by this small company rivaled the advanced game engines made by giants such as EA, Frostbite and CryEngine alike. With state-of-the-art visuals and fidelity, it served as a benchmarking tool for years. The combat no longer being on this quick-time event nonsense, it now followed a fully action combat style, almost hack and slash in nature. It fit the overall Witcher ideals perfectly, albeit a lot of its RPG mechanics were removed, which for fans of the genre might have been slightly disappointing. Plus, the restriction on potions to meditation probably wasn't a very smart idea. Witcher 2 made the Witcher name become ever more popular in many gaming circles. On sales alone, it doubled more than The Witcher 1 ever achieved. The series had also been heavily hurt by piracy. Nevertheless, CD Projekt's ideals and philosophy did not waver. DRM free versions of the game were offered using their own and new online service GOG, or Good Old Games, and this might I add during a time where permanent online verifications systems were being added to many AAA games. That, along with free DLC and other good practices, made CD Projekt Red to be embraced by most of the gaming community. All of this culminated to an eventual release of The Witcher 3. Not much is needed to say about this. Tens of millions copies sold, critically acclaimed, successful in every single way, and once again improving on its previous iteration to be bigger, better, and bring all of those things lost with Witcher 2, its innate RPG mechanics and the unique atmosphere more comparable to the books. Released in 2015, and even to this day, is talked about and played constantly. One of the most successful game trilogies of this generation, one that didn't come easy. It had a very turbulent road, but one that embraced its faults and that improved and shaped them till a masterpiece was eventually created.